Hey, it is 5 favorites with one of my favorite people. We have Joshua Bilmes. Hi, Joshua.
Hello, Brandon.
Joshua is my agent.
Yes.
I met Joshua for the first time in 2000 at the Nebula weekend in New York. I was there with Scar, Ethan Scarstedt, and one other. Was it Dan? Might have been Dan.
It might have been Dan. I know that you had been encouraged to come by Dave Wolverton, Dave Farland, who said network, and you went forth and network.
Go forth to New York and meet agents and editors. And I met you, and then you promptly rejected the thing that I sent to you. But then you later on accepted like the third thing I sent to you eventually. And thus, a friendship and career were both born at the same time.
20 years ago right now.
Yeah.
It was March 2023 when Moshe Feder said, I want to buy Elantris, and September when he actually did. So we're in that.
Were we at World Fantasy when we got that signed?
Signed the contract that year, World Fantasy.
Joshua, I have so many Joshua stories. But one of my favorite stories was that weekend. We signed the contract. We went out to dinner, Korean food. You took me to Korean food. And then we went to a Kinko's and we photocopied the contract so that I had a copy for my records, which is a very Joshua thing. And I came out, because you were outside like doing something. You were like checking, I don't know, a phone or something like that. Yeah. And I came out and I got him. And you said to me, did you get a receipt? And I said, it was 22 cents. He's like, go get a receipt. In this sort of young writer, you need to learn to start expensing things. And you're gonna claim that 22 cents on your taxes as a point of pride. You made me walk in, get a receipt for 22 cents.
And now we DocuSign contracts, no going to Kinko's.
Yeah,
no
all the fun
photocopies.
No. It was 2 years after that Elantris came out, and I flew to New York, and you had ideas for what to do with me. You towed me.
Oh, bookstores.
Yes.
Yes.
What'd you do? Tell the wonderful folks what you did to me.
We probably walked extensively around Manhattan, visiting Borders and Barnes and Nobles and whatever.
Every indie, even all the ones that didn't have my book.
Anything we could find. Something that I probably wouldn't do today because there are fewer bookstores. Like it used to be, if I would drag Brandon out to suburban Washington, which we did later on a trip, you could visit the Borders on one end of the mall, the Barnes & Noble at the other side of the mall, and there'd be a Walden Books in between, and you could say, let's go out there. Now with fewer bookstores, it's like, you're going to go travel all that way to visit, the one Barnes & Noble that's left from all of that.
But you like walking. It was actually a really good experience, but it was exhausting. You did not stop. You just were going. And I was just one end of Manhattan to the other end of Manhattan. I swear we walked like all the way up to Harlem and stuff like that. We probably actually didn't, but it felt like it. And we hit so many. I do know we were up by Lincoln Center at one point.
Yes.
And I do know we were way downtown at one point. So we at least went that far, right?
Yeah, 2005. There were probably, you would have had a big Borders in the financial district.
Yeah.
You had a Barnes & Noble in a little bit away, and Lincoln Center, you had a big Borders near Lincoln Center. I forget when the Barnes & Noble across the street
And you
closed,
did take me to the Strand.
Yeah.
And, of course, all the local indies. So Joshua loves to walk.
Yes.
We went to Beverly Hills once for some Hollywood meetings, right?
Yeah.
And we get there, and I meet you, like, on the street corner. We walk into the hotel, and we're checking in, and the young woman at the desk was like, "Oh, did you come far?" I'm like, "Oh, I flew in from here." And you said, "Yeah, I landed at LAX and walked here." And she was like, "You what?" And he's like, "You're like, oh, it was only 8 hours with my luggage. I stopped and saw some things." And she's like, "You walked through the parts of LA between LAX and Beverly Hills?"
Yeah, well,
This is just Joshua. You know?
But I think the worst of these stories is the time when Borders put out a press release that a new store was opening in Century City on a particular day, and there was a Worldcon in Anaheim, and we drove to that store, and it wasn't opening on the particular day. And I was like, how does Borders not know on the Thursday before the day they think the store is going to open that it isn't actually going to open that day?
Me, I'm just like, oh, these things happen. You are an agent. You track these things. We understand.
Yeah.
But maybe the Joshuas of the world, like you got to do what you say.
But you did try and get them to let you into the store to sign the book so they would be ready for the opening day. No, they didn't, and you were very...
I did manage to talk my way into a closed store once.
Okay, but that wasn't the time.
That wasn't the time. It was a Barnes & Noble I talked my way into that I drove to, and they were closed, and it had been different on their website, and they let me in to sign my books.
Yeah.
But anyway, we actually are doing 5 favorites, not just Brandon and Joshua reminisce, though there will probably be a bunch of that. I asked you, what do you want to do for 5 favorites? And you picked
pasta shapes.
Favorite pasta shapes. Because you're Joshua.
I'm Joshua.
Yep. And so I'm actually kind of lucky that you picked this, because there are a whole host of things you could have picked. Like you could have picked your favorite, what's that pizza place? Pizzeria Uno?
Pizzeria Uno,
which I've been to one of, and you've been to...
I went to 50 of them, and like 48 of them are now closed.
And you could have said your favorite Pizzeria Uno, and I would have just had one thing on my list. Like, there are all sorts of things that you know that I have no experience in.
And that was why I wasn't going to say video games, because you would have a lot, and I would be stuck in the Atari 2600.
There were a couple of good games on the 2600, but you could have said 2600 games. But we're going to do favorite pasta shapes. So we start with me so that we can end with your number 1. So my number 5 is a fettuccine. What's your feeling on fettuccine?
I have nothing against fettuccine, but it is most commonly accompanied by the Alfredo sauce, and I have never been a big fan of heavily creamed pasta.
Interesting.
So,
because I really like a good creamy pasta personally, but it was hard for me to decide. Like I decided I had to pick based on the pasta itself. That if I were just going to make any sauce and throw the pasta in, not which pastas as it's normally served. And so for me, a fettuccine, it can go in pretty much anything, and I'll be fine with it. It does work better with a white sauce, but I'm cool with the fettuccine. Not my favorite, but I do have great memories of my father fixing fettuccine for me when I was young, and he would just do a garlic butter sauce in the fettuccine, and not every pasta can you make that work with. And the fettuccine, it worked wonderfully. And your number 5 is kind of an abomination.
What do you have against farfalle?
So farfalle, do you say it farfalle, not farfalle?
I don't know the correct. I guess we could go with bow tie and avoid any.
So you put this on the list because we were sitting and discussing beforehand the worst pasta shapes, and you were overhearing me talk about what a terrible pasta is, and you immediately put it on your list. You were not going to.
No, I think farfalle is the thing you really don't like that you do when you're kind of getting tired of all of the things you do. So I could always get, the grocery stores would always have the elbows or the ziti or the spaghetti on sale. And Farfalla would be kind of awful as it was the splurge. It was the new and different kind of pasta.
It's terrible. I've had it once in a while that I've liked it, but normally people cook it poorly, right?
Yeah.
And so you end up, because it's got a variety of thicknesses, you end up with a pasta that often has a crunchy middle when people don't know what they're doing, right? And then sauce doesn't really stick to it for whatever reason. You end up with, it doesn't taste like anything because the sauce doesn't stick to it. It's just like the worst pasta. It's the one that kids get, so you can convince kids to eat it because it looks like a funny shape. When, they won't eat like things that are good. They'll, like, my children, they'll order the worst ice cream flavors because they look cool. And it is when you go to Baskin Robbins and you get a nice, awesome ice cream cone, your kid's there, and they look at the one that is neon green.
The pink bubble gum.
That pink bubble gum, and they're like, I want that. Farfalle or bow tie or farfalle. It is the pink bubblegum ice cream of pastas.
And I'm not disagreeing, but it was the variety choice. And I think we all have something that isn't actually good that we like to do occasionally
you're right.
and hate to admit it.
I like Kraft mac and cheese, even though I acknowledge it is not very good. My wife likes frozen burritos. Do you have like a food like that that's just like, this is awful? Like,
it's my sweet tooth. I mean, my ability to just ingest calories from good sweets, whether I need them or not. And that's why I walk, so I can afford to then go and have more calories.
Because some of the best meals I've ever had were meals you bought for me. Because I grew up in the Midwest. I did not grow up in a foodie region or have the money for, nice restaurants and stuff until I got into publishing. Then I couldn't, obviously pay for it because we made 10 grand off my first book. But you always take your authors out to dinner, regardless of whether they're the best sellers or not. And good restaurants, and you would find the good restaurants. And so some of my first experiences with food that is really high quality and tastes good were things that you took me to.
Well, glad to help.
So the rest of my list is pretty boring. Number 4 for me is ziti or ziti. It's the refined connoisseur's penne, because penne is another one of these things that just never works as well as I want it to. I've had some good penne, but it's also often cooked wrong. The pasta doesn't stick to it as well as I want. It's one of these things. It is too well regarded. It's the most overrated pasta of all time. Penne. Quote me on that.
Okay.
What's your opinion on penne? I know it didn't make your list.
Well, penne and ziti are kind of similar. They're both like a tube, and I just I didn't put penne on my list because I think I like ziti better, and I didn't feel like penne was distinct enough to want to have both.
Okay. Well, I can respect that because ziti's just better all around.
Yeah.
The smaller tube means that you get more pasta kind of trapped in it, or more sauce trapped in it, and things like that. It cooks more evenly. Just a far superior pasta.
Yeah. So.
What's your number 4?
Spaghetti, and it's just basic. It's spaghetti. It's like spaghetti is to pastas what said is to writing.
Yep.
It might not be fancy or great or anything else, but you can always count on it to kind of do what you need.
Do you like the spaghetti that's got the brown butter and Mizithra on it? Have you had that?
Well, I mean, I had
brand?
that with you at a spaghetti warehouse.
Yeah,
you
Spaghetti
and Dan,
Factory.
Spaghetti Factory, on one of my first visits to Utah.
I do like
So,
that. It's one of my
yeah.
favorite, very simple dishes.
Yeah. And I think the other thing with spaghetti, one of the associations for my favorite pastas was the era in my life that I associate them with. And from when I moved to New York in the mid-'80s to the 1994 baseball strike, I had season tickets to the upper deck, like really cheap seats at Shea Stadium. And I didn't have a lot of money. Fridays was one of the nights that I would eat out. So after the Mets games, I would go to a restaurant called Uncle George's in Astoria, 24-hour Greek restaurant that at that time was still in its heyday. It later faded and closed. But you could get a plate of spaghetti for like $3 or $4. So spaghetti is the pasta that I associate with the weekend splurge eat when you wanted something cheap after a baseball game, and it was late enough that not many places were open.
Did you and Moshe ever have words about his Yankee fandom versus your Mets fandom? Is that a thing?
Moshe and I would have been more likely to have words if we rooted for different teams in Australian rules.
That's right.
Football.
You and your football, your Australian Aussie rules.
Yeah.
Did he get you into that, or did you get him into it?
No, when I went to Melbourne for Worldcon in 1999 and saw a game, I just fell in love with the sport. So that was before Moshe was even on the radar.
Moshe's my editor, if I didn't mention that.
And who bought Elantris and so it was interesting when I discovered that Moshe had this passion for Australia, which is not a common passion in the U.S.
Were you always a bit of a foodie, or is that a thing you grew
No,
into?
and we'll get to that kind of later in the list a little.
Well, my number 3 is angel hair. I really like I really like a good light sauce on a light angel hair, like just some spices, maybe a little bit of olive oil. You can just toss some angel hair in that. It's the pasta that makes me feel like I'm eating healthy, even though it's still pasta.
You can't argue with that. So
Angel hair is a good pasta.
It is.
I go through phases where I prefer angel hair to anything else.
And it's a really good base for certain kinds of like protein dishes.
Yes, it is.
Because it forms a nice like nest of pasta rather than like a spaghetti or ziti. It's just kind of you can nest your chicken something in angel hair.
I have one of my favorite memories is I went to Atlanta when my dad was living there. And this was 2007. I was after I was published, and I'd started to have nice meals and enjoy nice places. And my dad had always known good places, but I'd been too young to appreciate them, right? And I hadn't really ever gone with him to them. And once in a while I had as a kid, and I, would get a Shirley Temple and sit there and have whatever, they would make for kids, chicken tenders, while he had a real meal or something like that. But at this point, I'm in my 30s, and he knew this really nice steakhouse that was like a little corner, not a chain, that did jazz music, live jazz music, steaks, and the steaks all came with a little side of angel hair with a light cream sauce. You wouldn't have liked it for that reason. But the steak with the angel hair, the light cream sauce, and it was a really good steak, and I wasn't used to really good steaks then, and the live jazz music and kind of the ambiance is one of my favorite memories.
So
what's your number 3?
Ziti. It was definitely a good pasta when I was cooking pasta at home. And also the baked ziti. And again, going back to eras in my life, and Friday being splurge day. So when I worked at the Scott Meredith Agency at the dawn of my career, there was near the office a not very good deli called Dibs 2. But if you've ever been to New York, just the streets are full of these places where you get basic Italian takeout food, and it may or may not be very good, but it's where you go for lunch from the office because it's cheap and around. And Dibs 2 was seriously not good, but you could get a pretty big plate of really greasy baked ziti for very little money. It was with mixed emotion when Dibs 2 was taken over by Bagel, their 3rd Avenue location, which is one of my favorite bagels in New York. And it's both a very good bagel. I've gone in the past year and seen like 40 people waiting outside because it's in the guidebooks and it's a good bagel and it's a classic, like thick, good New York bagel. So I don't like it only for that reason, but when I go in and kind of remember that I'm having this good bagel in the graveyard of the Dibs 2 delicatessen, well, one, I can really bore people if I'm taking friends or family to wait on a line with 20 other people for the bagel and we need somebody to talk about. The other thing with baked ziti, wedding buffets. So it's kind of a celebrational dish because it's just a very basic, if you're not doing a fancy wedding, it is like totally one of the most likely to be found in the buffet line dishes in my experience.
I have never had it at a wedding. But we do weddings different out here.
So,
it's a different thing, right?
Yeah.
Like I have any wedding I've been to, the wedding dinner has been for a small party and has been at a restaurant. There's never been a buffet that I've been to and it's usually close friends and family. And then there's a reception, which is usually like just in a church cultural hall. And it's just like, that's not actual food. That's finger food and things like that. I've never been to like the way people do things out here. We don't have the big wedding dinner that has the buffet and stuff like that.
Yeah, and that's something we do a lot in the, Northeast, Midwest. And when you want to feed 80 people and not, not go
too far,
stand by.
What, I don't know if I've ever asked this. What made you move to New York to become an agent?
Well, I mean, I had the job at the Scott Meredith Agency first.
Oh, so, outside of New York?
No, they were in New York, but obviously I wasn't going to commute from my parents' house forever.
So how did you get that job then?
I mean, basically, I had been bothering the editor of Analog, Stan Schmidt, with letters critiquing each issue of Analog. He would write back. Betsy Mitchell, who's now the science fiction consultant at Open Road, and has had a lot of other publishing jobs, she was the number two to help launch Baen Books. And oddly enough, on the basis of the letters, offered me freelance work at Bain.
Okay.
That was my publishing introduction. And then when I'm looking for a job after college, well, I know Stan Schmidt, who was a Scott Meredith client at the time. I know Betsy Mitchell at Bain, which is a Scott Meredith customer at the time. So, that was a help to getting that first
it's interesting.
job.
So both you and Moshe, your early experiences with publishing was annoying editors.
Well,
because you wrote the letters. You know Moshe's stories? He told you this? He
no.
showed up, I swear it was Stan Schmidt also, at his house in New York, because Moshe lives out in Queens or whatever. And because he wanted back issues, and he couldn't find, because he wanted his collection full. And he showed up at the other. I think it was Stan, but it could.
Oddly,
and just asked for one.
To bring in one other name to that, I had a conversation with Ellen Datlow, longtime editor in the field, last December, and she got the job as fiction editor of Omni magazine, kind of in a way just by hanging around, which is really hard to do in the more corporate world. But
this is how sci-fi was.
I mean, and it's just a very different world right now. But her story is different, but had some of the same flavors, and I was really fascinated to be hearing it from her. I'd never really just, spoken to her about that.
The way Moshe tells it, he showed up at Stan's house and was just like, hey, I need this specific back issue. And he's like, I think I have that. Go look in this rack. And Moshe's looking through and being like, oh, I like this issue. Oh, I need this issue. And Stan's like, hey, here, kid, read some Slush. And just handed him some Slush and said, which of these do you like? And Moshe started reading Slush for free.
And that was part of Ellen's story, I think, was she was just, I'm here, I'll read Slush, but I'm going to be around and be here.
I've told you before that a novel that I sent to Tor vanished into the black void of slush that they had there. In the years before I got published, I submitted White Sand to Tor, I'm trying to remember his name, but he eventually went to Bain. But it vanished into the black void of slush there. And I still remember when I first visited Tor, like in 2006 or whenever it was, or 2005, looking through and being like, I wonder if my manuscript is just in here somewhere in one of these piles. Because
they had a lot of books piled up in the office back then.
And I thought, maybe someone's going to run across a Brandon Sanderson novel in slush. And I'm still waiting. Like when they did the move, that was my last. They left the Flatiron, which was classic landmark of in New York. There, if you've seen the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, that's what they put the Daily Planet in, the exterior shots. That's where Tor Books was. It's moved, and I just thought maybe last year or whatever when they did the move that someone would call me and say, "Hey, Brandon, we found your manuscript," but.
And the weird thing, kind of my first job doing freelance work at Bain and Tor were based in the same suite of offices.
Because Tom was a silent investor, right?
I mean, Tom was an investor in Bain, and I think there were other investors that had money in both companies, and they were then sharing an office, and then later were sharing separate offices, but on the same floor of a different building. So
we probably ought to finish these 5 favorites instead of just talking publishing stories. So my number 2 is Spaghetti. You would put it at number 4. Spaghetti. When we get to my top pastas, remember my rubric for this was, what can I throw in anything? And I know it'll be pretty good. And so my top 2 pastas, I can put any sauce on. And like it. Spaghetti, I can eat with any sauce. Spaghetti, just like you said, it really is the said. But I really like it. It's just there are few of these that I will like ever just be like, I need a plate of this. But spaghetti, once in a while, I'm just like, I need a good plate of spaghetti.
So
best spaghetti I ever had was in Madrid, which I'm sure is just horrifying to all the Italians watching. Because, but in Italy, I didn't have a lot of spaghetti.
yeah.
The times I've been to Italy, you end up with just there's different pastas, and there's rarely even spaghetti on the menu. So,
And I picked lasagna. I'm not a cook, but lasagna, when JABberwocky was small, during the holidays like Easter and Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, when all of the ingredients were on sale, I would just love to go into my kitchen and saute up a bunch of peppers and onions and tomatoes and whatever, and just make a sauce and then make a lasagna that would last me for 4 days. And it was pretty good. And one of the best cooking tips I ever got was, you don't need to cook the noodles. So I would just take the ranzoni noodles, put them hard in the lasagna, and like it's bacon at 350 degrees for 45 minutes. The noodles were plenty soft by the time you took the lasagna out of the oven without having to cook them and then separate the cooked noodles and everything.
So lasagna, I love a good lasagna, but it didn't make my list because I felt like it was cheating. Because lasagna is not about the noodle. Lasagna is about all the other stuff. The noodle is there to give like a thin barrier between layers of other good stuff. The lasagna is cheating.
Okay. Caught.
You promised you were going to talk about your foodiness. Is that related to your number one?
Yeah,
okay,
I think, yeah.
Let's move on to our number ones because we have the same number one, which is elbow macaroni.
Yep.
Which is, if there is more of a said, it's like spaghetti's the ask and macaroni's the said. If there's a more common noodle than spaghetti, it's elbow mac. It's probably spaghetti is probably number one. But I love an elbow macaroni. Like, it's probably the same for a lot of people. My love of it is related to the fact that my grandmother would make this gooey mac and cheese that as a kid I loved, and that cemented it. Mac and cheese. On my first date with Emily, which was a blind date, we went to a Italian restaurant. Isaac actually set us up, and so he was there on double dating with me and Emily and someone I set him up with, I believe. Yeah, he set me up with Emily. So it was just one of those things. Theirs didn't go anywhere, but Emily and I ended up getting married. And we had a conversation about what our favorite pastas were. And I mentioned homemade mac and cheese. And she says, I make a mean homemade mac and cheese. And so for my birthday, like a couple months later, she made me mac and cheese. So my grandma and my wife, I have these fond memories of mac and cheese creations. And so it had to land at number one for me.
So elbow macaroni also mine, and that was my childhood pasta, but in a different way than Brandon's. We didn't get an allowance. We got lunch money. So I was taking the lunch money that our father would give, and that was going to buy comic books. But that would mean I wasn't having lunch at school. So I would come back and boil up 8 ounces of elbow macaroni with a little bit of tomato sauce, because that would be my main meal of the day.
Because you were buying comic books.
Because I was buying comic books
awesome.
With the lunch money. And probably spoiling my appetite for dinner. But as my siblings can vouch for, My mother was an amazing person, but cooking was kind of the thing that got the short shrift in that. So if I was eating a big pot of elbow macaroni at 3 p.m. and not actually having an appetite for dinner, that wasn't such a bad thing. And it really wasn't until after I moved to New York City that I started to explore things like Indian and Thai and other, like, not your basic, very basic cooking. Fish is something that I still eat very rarely because it was the worst of the bad dinner dishes.
I don't eat fish. I think I blame my, when I was a kid, I went to a place called the Lollipop Farm, which is childcare, but kind of childcare mixed with a bit of a preschool. And they made us eat fish sticks, and I hated them. I thought they were so gross. And to this day, I still just can't eat fish without thinking of being 4 years old at the Lollipop Farm.
Yeah, and we would have like fillets of cod or something that were just basically cooked kind of on a pan right out of the, the styrofoam and plastic from the grocery store, usually very dry. And the flavor was coming from the lemon juice we would put on. And it took me a really long time, like even to say, salmon, you can probably do some salmon. But that's...
Well, you live in a good place to be able to experiment with a lot of different foods.
Yes.
The New York, the cuisine there is incredible. Now, it's partially... I say that because I know you and Moshe, who just take me to the incredible places when I go out. But I always feel like we go to New York and like you pick one random place on the corner, you walk in, it's gonna be better than almost anything I can get here. Just because I think it's the competition. Like that place will be gone if in a week if it doesn't do really well.
And plenty of restaurants in New York come and go.
Yes, come and go so quickly. There is a mac and cheese only restaurant in New York. Is that still there?
I don't know, but I have definitely seen mac and cheese only places in the world relatively recently. And a lot of them may be kind of gussied up, elevated or something. But
what comic books were you buying back then?
So a pretty sizable number. We grew up in a small town in New York, and a lot of the shopping was in Paramus, New Jersey, which did not have clothing sales tax. That was also one of the closest theaters to go and see a 70 millimeter. Like you want to see Empire, you want to see Star Trek 2 or whatever and do it or it's the movie that's broadening out from New York City before you had so many big multiplexes. So we found a comic book store, Frank's Comics in the Bergen Mall, and actually my younger brother and I would pool and have pull list there. And it was right at the dawn of the direct market. And comics back then didn't cost, more than 50, 60 cents or something. So even without having a lot of money, with both my younger brother and I contributing, we had a pretty good pull list when we would go every month or two. to Paramus.
And this would be what, the 70s?
Early 80s,
Early
late
80s.
70s, early
Okay.
80s, yeah.
I'm not a big comic book buff, but I know that there were
yeah.
some really good runs of like the X-Men back then that really put them
Yeah.
on the map and some things like
Yeah,
that.
and I mean, Ronin was an example, Frank Miller, of an early direct-only book.
I guess
Camelot,
Watchmen was pretty soon after that, wasn't it?
Yeah, Watchmen, Camelot 3000,
Okay,
which
yeah.
was one of the first DC comics that was done for the direct-only
Yeah.
market.
Okay.
Um,
That's cool.
So-
Well, Joshua, thank you. This was a different topic from what we normally do. So I appreciate you coming out, hanging out with us. Doing the, if you haven't watched it, Joshua was on the Frugal Wizard book club that we did on the channel. You can, I'm sure, hear lots of his thoughts on publishing and writing and things like that in that. So if you're interested on the thoughts and mind of an agent, Joshua, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Brandon. Great to do this.
Mhm.